Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a trilogy review for the Shadow of the Fox series by Julie Kagawa. The majority of this is going to be non-spoiler, and it will be non-spoiler for all three of the books, so even if you haven't read the first one, no worries, I won't be going into any spoilers until the very end, and I'll give a very clear indication that I'm about to go into spoilers. We follow two main perspectives in the story, Yumeko and Tatsumi. Yumeko is this really sweet, really naive, half kitsune girl, and kitsune is somebody who has fox powers. She's often very mischievous, she's a bit of a trickster, and these powers are mainly to do with illusions, and throughout the story you kind of see her come into her own, you see her develop these powers more. The other main perspective would be a samurai from a shadow clan named Tatsumi, and these two end up kind of, their paths collide when every 1,000 years a scroll can be pieced together to summon this dragon, and a wish will be granted by this dragon, and every 1,000 years pretty much this wish has ended up in the hands of somebody bad, and so these two now are trying to keep that from happening. Where Yumeko is very sweet, naive, and innocent, Tatsumi is her perfect counterpart because he is the exact opposite. He's been shown some of the darker things in the world. He has to guard this sword and use this sword that has the ability to kill monsters, but it also kind of has the soul of a monster within it, and he has to make sure that that doesn't consume him. He has to shut off all of his emotions all the time, whereas Yumeko is very free and silly and sweet, and the two of them paired together made for a very entertaining read. Their relationship is great. For a lot of people, when you have two main perspectives, a lot of times people wonder, does that mean there's going to be romance in the story? And I don't want to elaborate too much on that because I don't want to spoil anything for you. But what I will say is I always enjoyed their relationship. I liked the progression of their relationship. I liked how the dynamics between their relationship would change throughout the story. I just really love the two of them. I find that sometimes when you have dual perspective stories that most of the time are switching back and forth between these two main characters from chapter to chapter, sometimes the author can get kind of trapped in that setup, and it almost can feel like, oh, this chapter happened just so that we could alternate. And I never felt that way about any of these books. Anytime we switched perspective, I was happy to be with that character. It didn't feel like, oh, well, this one's just filler. So I really appreciated that. I find for myself, I really like a large cast of characters usually, because when you can go between lots of point of views, then you don't have to worry about, oh, this one's just thrown in here since we need to change it up a little or something. And then I like single point of view because you're just with that one person the whole time. With the dual perspective, I think it can be really difficult, but I found that the author interspersed between their perspectives, you would occasionally get something different. And so I liked that break from our two main characters, but like I said before, never felt like the author was trapped by having a dual perspective setup. Both of the perspectives are first person, and I think that that is a little bit more unusual. Usually when I see a multiple point of view story, it's third person point of view. But I felt like the characterization was really good in that even though it's first person, I always knew who I was with. The characters have very distinct personalities, very distinct voices, even in the narration. And it just helped enhance the characters and their personalities. It kind of reaffirmed how they were, how they thought, and then when you would be with the other person, how the other perspective behaved, very much matched what you would get when you were actually in their head. It was never like I would be with Tatsumi and all of a sudden Yumeko seemed very different than she was in her own chapters. It was never really like that. So I felt like the personalities of the characters were very vivid and very clear. The story, based off of the nature of its premise, it is a traveling story, and so it can have this sense of randomness to it where things kind of just feel like they happen, and I actually didn't mind. It did end up feeling somewhat plot driven in that you have a purpose that the characters are aiming toward, but along the way it meanders immensely, and I liked it. I felt like in this story, there's so many times that you get these really interesting, fascinating pieces of Japanese folklore, the different kinds of monsters and different kinds of curses and everything that our characters would end up encountering. And every time it came to one, I was like, oh wow, this is so interesting. And I thought it was really cool. Plus, a lot of times it made it so that the story, there wasn't really a dull moment. It was always twists and turns, and they always had something they had to overcome. Despite that, I still felt like we got good character growth and character relationship building throughout the trilogy. I do think the first one is perhaps the most charming, and it very much pulls you in. It takes a little bit of time to develop. You are introduced to the characters separately before you see them together. But I found the first one very captivating and kind of sweet in a weird way, even though a lot of the trilogy is kind of dark. The second book, in my opinion, is the weakest. So if you pick up the first, you enjoy it. You read the second, and maybe you don't enjoy it as much. I think that the third one definitely, it brought it back for me. It's not that the second one was bad, but there are some events that happen at the end of the first one that set us up to have a very different feel in the second one. And the second one, I think, just had middle book syndrome. It kind of had to take what happened at the end of the first. We had this struggle throughout the second one, and then we're thrust into the third one, and the third one is just race to the finish. It is stakes that are raised, and then they're raised again, and then they're raised again, and it's this roller coaster of emotions. It's action-packed. It's super fast-paced. That last one, I feel like it's what you want in a conclusion to a story. It was just constantly punching me in the face. Besides just Tatsumi and Yumeko's points of view, we also have some other side characters that kind of get picked up along the way. They don't really get their own perspectives, but you do get to know them quite well. Just like with Yumeko and Tatsumi, I felt like the side characters had very distinct personalities, and I only wish that maybe some of them we could have gotten to know a little bit more in the first one, because in the second one, I loved our main characters so much that I felt like, in a way, the second book was more of a book for our side characters, a couple of our side characters, which that's okay. I don't mind getting to know them better, but I kind of missed my main characters. Like, I really wanted them more, even though they are the main perspectives. It felt like we were spending more time with the side characters, and weirdly, even though I wanted more side characters in the first one, I just felt like maybe it could have been balanced a little bit, where we got more in the first, maybe a little bit less in the second. As for the writing itself and the way that the story, it is back and forth, but it definitely has an episodic feel to it. I could see so many of the events in the story feeling like short stories in a way, because it meanders and because they're constantly being faced with new things, new challenges to overcome. You can kind of feel like, oh, okay, that would be the stopping point of an episode, and then the next episode would happen, and it's this new thing that they have to overcome. Even though the whole season, if you will, is still like, oh, we got to get to this point, we got to do this thing, that's the main goal, the overarching thing. It felt very episodic, and the writing style I thought was very casual. And in the second book especially, some of the antagonists speak in a way or think in a way that is very casual, and I can see that being off-putting. It's not completely to the point where it doesn't feel like a fantasy story. I think a lot of fantasy fans, they don't really want the characters to think or speak in a way that feels too modern or too casual. They almost want that hint of formality. They want some formality with the way the characters speak. And it's not that that is completely out the window. I just found that it was very direct. I wouldn't say it's a particularly artsy or beautiful writing style. It's pretty straightforward, but I think that actually, in my opinion, was a good thing for this series, because there are so many things that I am not familiar with throughout the story. So you have the way that the characters say each other's names, sort of like how we say Mr. and Mrs. They have their own versions of those sorts of things, and those have different meanings. Different titles mean different things. You also have the different kinds of monsters. You have different kinds of cursing and things like that are throughout the story. And if I had this very artistic writing style coupled with all of these terms I'm not familiar with, I think it would have been maybe a tad overwhelming, or at the very least, I would have had to constantly be wrapping my head around things when it's so action-packed and fast-paced that I think it would have made it slower. There's actually a glossary in the back of the book that illustrates what I'm referring to when it comes to all the different terms, and you actually have, at least in the third one, you have several pages of all these different terms. I wouldn't say it's something where if you don't memorize all these terms, you're not going to be able to understand what's going on. It's not really like that, but they do use these things throughout the story. I love that kind of stuff because I really like getting to read stories that are very unapologetic when it comes to their inspirations. This is Japanese inspired, and so there are a lot of things from Japanese folklore that are in this story, and I'm not familiar with that kind of stuff, so I really like being thrown into it rather than having those things substituted for maybe more familiar terms. I like that we're getting this folklore that I don't know as well. I just think it immerses me in the world so much more. Overall, if you think that this story sounds like a good time, if you think it sounds fun, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I do think that middle book had middle book syndrome, but it was worth it in the end because I loved the first one so much and it set up the third one really well. And even though I thought it was a good time and I had a lot of fun reading it, I was pretty emotional in that third one for a lot of it. I was reading the last chunk and I was like, what are you doing to me? Stop it. And you would think like, oh, our heroes, they saved the day. Oh wait, no, they didn't. Is this person gonna die? It was just constant back and forth emotions like that. So it's a really good time, but I also thought it was very emotional. But it's not going to be anything that wows you with really poetic ways of describing things. It was so much fun. I really liked it, but I also felt like it got me. It got me a few times. I am going to touch on some spoilers for the third book now. If you don't want to be spoiled, definitely don't keep watching. I'm primarily going to be talking about spoilers to do with the end of the book, so you especially don't want to keep watching. But anyway, spoilers starting now. Okay. I am not somebody who needs a romance in their stories, but if a romance is there, I'm like, I want it to be well developed because it's still a relationship and it's a significant part about being a human being, and so I want it done well. And I just love Yumeko and Tatsumi so much. I love them both apart, and I just want them to be together and be happy. They're just my sweet little innocent angels, and I love them so much. And when Tatsumi died, I was like, no, use the wish to bring him back, because she wishes like banish all the things that don't belong in this world. And part of me is like, say banish all the things that don't belong in this world and keep Tatsumi here with me. I don't want to wait 100 years. That's the other thing that sucks too, because she can basically be immortal, and I'm like, if she was just a regular person, she would have died and then been with him already. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying I wanted Yumeko to die. I'm really glad that she basically got to be a princess and she found her home and she got to be with her mother and have a family and a place that was hers, and that was really sweet, and I was so happy for her for that. But gosh darn it, Tatsumi deserved that too. The poor guy, his whole life, he had to like shut off all his emotions, and he finally found somebody who made him feel something, who allowed him to be a person, and he didn't get to experience that with her. We get that little nod at the end that he's back, but still, I'm either a hopeless romantic who wanted them to have their happily ever after immediately, or I am really morbid and I just wanted her to die immediately so they could just die together. Because, oh man, I just, like, the other characters dying, I was like, yeah, I kind of thought that was going to happen, but I didn't think Tatsumi would die. But I'm glad I'm glad they got to be together in the end, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I am glad, but gosh, I feel for them. Why did she have to wait 100 years? I have the most random thing to mention right now. It has nothing to do with Yumeko, Tatsumi, any of our side characters. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's a very, very, very specific thing. So they are fighting all the bad guys, and there's the really giant one that, I'm going to say their names wrong, Dasuke and then Tatsumi have to fight together. And the creature's skin, its coloring is described as being like the color of a drowned infant or something like that. And these books are pretty dark. They're pretty violent. And I still was caught off guard though when I got to that part. I was like, wait, what? It was just such a, like, do infants have a different color than most people when they're drowned? Like, why wasn't it just, it had the color of a drowned, like, do infants look I mean, I don't actually want you guys to tell me. It's just, it was so, that really caught me off guard. It's a very, that's a very specific description. I did think it was kind of interesting that, once again, I'm going to say it wrong, Hikemono got to be free in the end, and the way that he kind of was definitely turned because of Tatsumi's heart and how pure Yumeko was. I thought that was, I mean, I kind of liked that. I think that's a trope I like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, where they kind of had to work together with this terrible creature, and in the end he was kind of a little bit better. Anyway, definitely let me know your thoughts on this story. If you're gonna talk spoilers, just make sure you write spoilers and then enter a bunch of times so that anybody who hasn't read it isn't spoiled. But does anybody else feel like Yumeko and Tatsumi are two of your favorite, like, are they one of your favorite couples? Because they're one of my favorite couples. I love them so much. I just so wanted them to be happy. Every time that they smooched, I was like, yay. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this story. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you've enjoyed this trilogy, and I'll see you guys later.